I'm trying to share and now I can't do two things at once. All right. It's always an absolute pleasure to present with StuKit because I know we already have a lot of creative instructors that show up to these events knowing that you're going to get best practices and have a lot of reminders about what really matters. So I do call myself the Golden Ticket Professor. I think it was around 2007 in a high school hallway. I had a 16-year-old come up to me and tell me that he knew where he was going to college and he knew what he was going to major in. And I said, well, tell me more about it. And he had told me the college he was going to, and then he was going to major in accounting. And I thought, oh, well, that's very definite and very unique. I said, have you taken an accounting class? And he said, no. And I said, well, what made you pick accounting? And he said, well, I'm good at math. And my dad said that's the best way to make money doing math. And I said, well, okay, well, have you thought about talking to an accountant? And no. And what do you know what an accountant does during the day? No. And the more I reflected on that conversation, it was very quick and in passing, but it was very impactful to me because I remember growing up. This is going to be my old lady uphill both ways moment of the day, but I had to go to the library to get an address of a business. I grew up in Central Missouri and I really wanted to work for Hallmark Cards. And my mom had to take me to the library and we had to look up their address. And then my mom also had to take me to get the fancy paper for my electric typewriter to put in. And every time I wanted to send a resume, some of you may remember, we had to type it on the fancy paper. And we had to type the envelope and type the cover letter. And then we put on the stamp and we put it in the big blue box and hoped that it got there. We didn't know if the company was hiring. We didn't know who they hired, what they hired for, anything. And that was just kind of like our journey with trying to think about companies and jobs and positions and our future. And I watched these young people, like I can tell you I'm a very salty digital immigrant. I feel like I would just have been such a good digital native, but that's neither here nor there. I have an appreciation for it. But I watch these young people and I watch the access that they have to professionals and how very uncomfortable they are with that. So my golden ticket is this, and I use it at the high school level. I used it at the undergrad and graduate level. And I'm out there today using it in reverse with people in the business world. And that is your golden ticket is simply to start any conversation, whether it's a LinkedIn request, an email, a phone call, an in-person conversation with the sentence, I am a college student and I have promised these people, and I have seen it over and over again. When you start a sentence with that, things that you say after will be listened to. You will be heard. People will want to support and help and lean in. And it's so rare that our students are doing that. It's so awkward for them, and it's not a common occurrence for them. So when it does happen, it gets the people, I think, in the professional world more excited. I would urge all of you, as the professors of these young people and the instructors and teachers of these young people, to use your golden ticket. I used my golden ticket multiple times to open doors, to get guest speakers, to get, my people in front of my students and my students in front of people by saying, like, I'm an instructor, I'm a professor, and because people out there really do want to engage. And I think that it's, one of those hypocritical comments that I tell my students all the time. People want to talk about themselves. Now, not everybody wants to do it on a stage or in a very self-promoting way, but many of us want to share our journey. We want to share our history, want to share like what we do and what we think about what we do and what we think might be next with what we do. So the other thing that I'm constantly telling students is that you have to work as hard outside of the classroom as you do inside the classroom these days to establish a brand and a network. You have to have a professional network. And understanding that the students that you're teaching today, these are pre-COVID statistics. I'm not sure what they look like now after the Great Resignation and many other things, but I think just understanding like the general number is that it was the Department of Labor stated that today's learner, so our students, would have between 10 and 13 jobs by the time they're 35. Okay, that doesn't always mean like what their parents or we may think about the like the lack of loyalty or instability or those types of things. Some of those could be promotions within the same organization, but the mobility that these young people have today. And I used to say to my students, wouldn't it be great if you were like the seventh company that hired you, because you're bringing with you six other companies worth of training, development, culture, processes. Like you're going to be more valuable to those future companies. The same thing about like the professional network that you can develop. And it's a good portion of why students go to college is they want to make sure they're getting a good professional network. It's one of the things you read in the headlines these days about the remote work and its impact on young people is how are they getting around other professionals who are motivated and educated and, you know, all of those things. So the professional network, I think, is something that we all agree on that is massively important for them. But the thing that happens to us is we get in our grind of having to teach our objectives, wanting to crunch so much good stuff and experiential learning and all of these great things into a semester that sometimes we lose sight of the fact that if we could just take a deep breath and model some of these things, challenge our students, bring in our alumni, there's a lot. So today, I don't know that I'm going to give you anything like super revolutionary or super new, but hopefully just some things for you to keep on a lens, keep as an idea, maybe take back to your departments. I know what it's like to be the outlier sometimes in your department that is the one that is like constantly bringing in guest speakers or constantly wanting to do all of the really unique, different things. It's not just an outlier with your colleagues, but you're an outlier with the students too. And it's a lot of work to stay outside of the norm, right? I don't ever mind it. I've perfected my awkwardness over years, so I like to hang on to it as often as possible. One of the things I did want to bring up to kind of level set is just who is sitting in our classrooms right now and kind of what they're going through. So we think about the current state of mental health and the current state of like education and how that leans in. I was always a student growing up that I had to sit in the back of the room thinking to myself, when am I ever going to use this? Like if I couldn't answer that pretty clearly or someone hadn't answered it for me, I had kind of a real hard time paying attention like I should. I think in many ways, the academic challenge, and we could debate for days why this is, we're not here for that, but the academic challenge, the relativity of coursework is part of those feelings of stress, feelings of anxiety. So how can we figure out ways, as it says at the bottom, it is really more important right now than it has ever been before for your students to invest in really good academic support and programming and interventions. Now, I think we can do that in our classroom. I think we can continue to bring the outside in. A good portion of what these students worry about is fear of the unknown. Am I smart enough? Am I going to make it? Am I going to get that job? What am I doing here? Is it all going to be worth it? We can start to answer those questions and we can start to help those fears. The other thing, I love this quote, we cannot motivate people. I'm sure you all have like figured this out and like understand that this is a sense of feeling like, yes, we know we cannot motivate people, but we can create conditions for them to motivate themselves. And the way I like to do that is through like bringing my course objectives to life. How can I put action to this? How can I bring the outside in? How can I continue to make this relevant? Reduce the mundane activities and keep them connected as much as possible to people, activities, clients, whatever that is outside of the classroom, so they continue to feel the confidence in what they're learning, how they're learning it, and how they will be able to apply it. We need to just model really simple actions, making sure that we're embedding good things. And quite honestly, like if we sat and thought with a great deal of empathy as we think about our approach to our academic year and our classes, we probably know what their biggest questions are about some of these things. So we'll embed the answers. Don't wait for them to ask. I saw, sometimes I laugh when I see like major studies were done and the answer seems like something that we live every day. But one of the major studies recently was that college students really do want a relationship with their professors. even if they don't approach it. And I mean, we've known that forever, and we try and do those things. But I think just, again, trying to create these motivating environments, motivating lessons. It's exhausting, like I know for sure. But I think it's why we're all here. It's why we're all here on this, this great conference in the middle of our summer, is we're all wanting to try and figure out how to do these things. Fantastic quote. I'm very relational, so I read this and I was like, absolutely. The thing to get across to our students is trying to be, and remember, many of them are coming from a very standardized high school experience where everything was like, can I have a copy of the rubric? Is this on the test? They're very much about the performance and the transaction level. So how can we get them into this great multiplier about having a successful career, a good professional and personal brand and network? And that is to think about beyond the first job. I had a great colleague one time who used to tell students, like, this is going to be your first job, not your forever job. There is a major shift going on in the workforce right now, certainly not as fast as it needs to, but one that I think is really going to permeate through higher ed. So I'm going to urge you to get out ahead of this. It's stuff you've been doing, as always. But we're starting to realize knowledge-based job descriptions where we are requiring certain years of experience and a college degree, and we're naming off platforms and specific software. Those knowledge-based job descriptions are not effective, and we are not bringing in underrepresented and good diverse talent into our workforce. So shifting more towards skills-based. I'm very excited about this. I think it'll be great. The professional networking piece is something we've constantly worked on, especially as Gen Z has aged through our classrooms. There's always that time where your alumni wants to be involved somehow. And obviously the university would like that to be a transaction, but you are constantly trying to figure out better ways, especially as they move around. And I think we're better poised with technology and like what we've been through with the acceptance of virtual platforms and things to do that. So that's kind of what I want to spend some time on today. Obviously, as Virgil said, like, I love me some LinkedIn. Like, I'm all about it. I use it as often as possible. And I mean, it's almost 20 years old, owned by Microsoft. It's not the #1 most downloaded social media platform. That's obviously TikTok, but it is the platform with the highest engagement, which means the conversation piece. It is where you can do LinkedIn Learning, you can get certifications, you can do job alerts, you can connect with people. So here's a list of things that I just sat and brainstormed, like, as things that I would challenge you as educators, how to bring these things into your classroom. And I'm going to run through most of these and give you some examples. The first off is assigning your students to write LinkedIn articles. Not new things, probably. The example I have is an assignment I was already giving to students, helping them with their profile, constantly highlighting best practices as you see them, taking a little bit of time in class to talk about that. Use it as a search engine instead of jumping on Google or jumping on some news platforms or things. Use LinkedIn. Let them see you use it. Engage and highlight your alumni. Constantly be showing that. Remember, Covey taught us 21 days to make a habit. You guys have 16 weeks to make a networking habit. So I definitely think there's some great stuff here. So I mentioned using it as your search engine. LinkedIn News, if you start to see things in the news that you wanted to highlight or draw attention to, or if you know you're going to talk about a current topic in class, instead of going to other sites, maybe pull in that LinkedIn News just to show that you're writing it. I was hoping Larry would be in here today, but I know he's presenting in another room. But this is one of Larry Minsky's students, a student that was in one of my guest lectures when I did for him. And she got a hold of me after I spoke and said, hey, I did the secret weapon stuff you talked about. I updated my LinkedIn profile. And if you notice the Columbia College, she's pulled in their brand colors. She's kind of done something that really genuinely represents her. Obviously, as me being the golden ticket and professor, thinking that your golden ticket is being a student, I constantly challenge your students to put the word student first in their profile. I think there's some Stumpf personal brand documentation that says like that's not advised. So take that for me as you will, but I think it's super important for a couple of reasons. As they're engaging, as they're commenting, as they're liking things, as they're being active on the platform, we hope they will be recognized as a student. To me, that's another safety net for them. It takes away that anxiety and it takes away that awkwardness and just lets the world know, hey, I'm still learning here. Like, don't worry about, like, I'm still out here trying to learn. I think putting the word student in these profiles is fantastic. A couple more examples. And I'm going to caution quickly, like Sterling is a student who reached out and connected with me. He's a student at Point Loma. Yes. So he has put Point Loma University in his profile, but it's also recognizable in his profile is where he's put where he's at, as is probably a student worker on campus and his education. So just looking at Sterling's profile, you see Point Loma 3 times. Make sure you do something unique and different. If you look at Drew's, he's definitely added Kansas State, but he's also talked about what he's majoring in and what he has the certificate in something. So you can tell both of these young men have been on Canva, which I highly recommend. It's where I got my backdrop, like all the things on Canva. Super easy to go in and do something professional. There are the tiniest little roadblocks sometimes on LinkedIn, and it's usually like your profile picture, your banner photo, things that will get those students like caught up. Just have them do those baby steps, and I'll give you some tools later to help kind of work through some of that. But again, how do we highlight best practices and engage and highlight our alumni? I'm going to give you a really cool thing that's one of my favorite things to do with students. I don't know if Jen's in here, but she's had me guest speak a lot. So I knew what her numbers were. So I've set myself up for success here. If you go to the search bar in LinkedIn and you type in the college, you'll go to the page for your university. So here we are at Kansas State. If you notice, there are 144,049 alumni that are in some ways have mentioned or affiliated with Kansas State. So that is a fantastic resource for your student. If we drill down in the search, like here I've put marketing. We're at 27,091 alumni that somehow have marketing in their profile. So LinkedIn will go on to tell you where they live. So if you have students who want to move or, necessarily stay in the area, or maybe they're, from out of state, whatever that might be. And then it talks about like where these people work. So you can, and here's just a zoom out of all of that. But it will tell you, you can go through several things. So the first one is like, where do they live? Where do they work? Here it is, what do they do? So their current job title. So look at the number of people that have marketing somewhere in their profile, but are in business development or sales. And then what did they study? So depending on what your major is, what you study, I mean, you can really drill down to a really good, solid collection of your alumni for your students to engage with, which again, if you are someone who has never done this, if you're young, if you're unsure, if you are, LinkedIn does not feel good to them. Like when they spend hours on other social media platforms that give them that dopamine hit and they're totally entertaining, and then they get over to LinkedIn and there's just lots of words and lots of self-promotion and lots of things they're not used to. They do not have a comfortability with it. And I understand that, but they're going to need to learn. They're going to need to build that muscle. They're going to need to figure out ways, because I'm going to tell you, you can develop a really solid professional network, but if you do not have a brand and you do not maintain connection with that network, that will not be the way that you cultivate and develop that network, will not be sustainable to you when you need to deploy that network for yourself or for others. So you really want to make sure that we're talking about like investing and being around your network, but also keeping in touch with them. I had a student ask the best question of me in the fall semester, and his question was like, I got a bunch of people on my LinkedIn that I went to high school with. Should I just unload them? Oh, that's not that relationship piece I was talking about. But I said, here's the thing. Those people will have known you so long, but are you giving them artifacts and information about where you are now, who you are now, like what you're doing and what's important to you and what, things that you're reading and sharing, and like, how are you letting those people who knew you when you were a junior or senior in high school, how are you showing them your growth pattern, your trajectory, and like what's going on? If you're not creating content, you're probably not doing that. So in their mind, you are that person in high school. So that's where like the personal brand artifacts and the sharing of content and information comes in. So important to do that. A couple of things I mentioned: assigning articles to write. Whew, this one's a tough one. They don't always love to do this and put things out. Hopefully, depending on what you're teaching, that's not the case. But I had a situation in teaching a graduate class. So I know this will probably look a little different for your undergrads, but you have the time and they don't have to put like a ton of the information, like they don't have to create a ton of content, and you have the time to do revisions and like do kinds of great things. Like I've sent students to the writing lab before for an assignment. You could definitely send them for something like this. But let me tell you about Andy. Andy is in the graduate program. He turned in a reflection on a book we were reading, and Andy's trying to move from one position into like a technology job. And as I'm reading his reflection on this book, I thought to myself, if people could read this reflection, they would hire Andy. Like Andy is like exhibiting great leadership in this. He's very reflective in his empathy and the way he approaches and manages people and how he helps them do. And then I thought, oh, wait a minute. Andy's already written this. We really could show the world and leave it as a breadcrumb as to who Andy is and how he would be at work. So I approached Andy and said, look, I feel like we need to work together and turn this reflection that you've done into a LinkedIn article. So we took his leading leaders and he turned it into not only one, not only two, but 4 installments of a series of LinkedIn articles. And you could tell he was new to this, right? It's part 1, part 2, part 3, and part 4. But he continued to do this on things that he was running across. And he took some of Jay Shetty's work, and he was like, our influence and how to follow our whys. And they were little bite-sized pieces where he wasn't giving a book review, but he was doing really solid reflective work that showed who he is and how he would be to show up at work. And then he put those, if you go to people's activity and you click on articles, you can see all of those there. So those are those artifacts that I talk about. You can also put it in your featured area. And Andy just continues to go on and on and on with the work that he's doing in his graduate program and making sure that he is using that to develop a personal brand. Your students are doing amazing work. And whether it's writing a quick reflection of, maybe it's not a book they read, maybe it's of the student camp mimic simulation, maybe it's of a field trip. Speaking of, I have a student, Alyssa, took a field trip in 2019. I was talking to her, kind of mentoring through the pandemic, and she had all this great stuff about what she learned trying to do an internship during COVID. So she wrote an article about that. But I also challenged her, write a quick article about your field trip that you had when you got to go to the NFL career conference at the NFL Combine in 2019. So she did 3 quick takeaways. It's very quick. She included a couple of photos. It's very good. And it didn't take anything hardly from her. It was very easy to do. And it's something that will be withstanding as evidence again as to how she does. So not just writing articles, but reading some of the content on LinkedIn now. And one of the ones I found alludes to what I mentioned earlier about skills first. And this is, really good information about how we are trying to change the workforce to be more skills oriented. And then the skills that matter, how skills are changing, what do those look like? Because sometimes I know as instructors, we're constantly looking for like a tie-in and evidence for our students to say, look, what we're doing in here matters out there. This is what they're doing. And here's an example. And that's where I always lean onto LinkedIn for really good content like this. LinkedIn as a company has done a ton of really, I mean, they've got all of our data, right? They are using it for good, I feel like, in most instances. So you can go through and take a look at these. But you see down here where it says like jobs are changing, they're being accelerated because of the pandemic. Like there's really good relevant data in there. And one of the really great things that I found through, again, the LinkedIn resources were jobs that are on the rise. And look there, digital marketing professionals is one of them. And it gives you titles, top skills, regions of the country, those types of things. Like, I think that's fantastic for your students to understand. Whew, that's less anxiety. Like, I'm in a field where what I'm working on really matters, and how I can make sure I'm like documenting these skills. And that's something I'm going to talk about again in a minute. One of the other things that I did at every level, and I'm telling you, it's a tough one to do. We have to do a lot of modeling. It took some class time, but I assigned to my students writing recommendations for other people. Many of them in some classes have had internships, they've had part-time jobs, they are in groups with one another. So who can you write a recommendation about? If you have had me present in your class before, or you've seen me present on LinkedIn, you know that I talk about, like, in this area, as used to be, right, back in the day, students would approach and ask for a recommendation, and I would just go pull up a template and do find and replace for like all the important data, print it off, because it was usually like, it was when I was a high school teacher, it was for them for their college applications, and I knew only 2 or 3 people were going to read it. I didn't really need to be very unique in the fact that this was a template. As long as it represented the student well and I felt comfortable with it, like, it was fine. When you give a LinkedIn recommendation, it is 100% visible to everyone who looks at your profile and the person, like, that's good. But I have given, I don't know, over 40 some recommendations on from LinkedIn to other people. So when you go to my LinkedIn recommendation section, if you start seeing that I'm saying the exact same thing about 40 people, well, then I'm probably not a very authentic and genuine person to work with. And I could tell you I'm relational, but it doesn't show. If you go through and you read how intentional I have been in representing each person and what I feel like their skill sets are and how to recommend them, it is actually harder for our students to request a recommendation. It should be, because they really truly have to think about, like, what do I want my recommender to write about? You have all probably been asked to write a recommendation letter, and there's nothing worse than somebody just saying, would you write a recommendation? Because you're left thinking, about what? Like, your work ethic, your creativity. You're like, give me some indicators what you want me to write about. So in many instances, starting with giving recommendations, so much less nerve-wracking for our students. So I've actually started assigning this in class as part of a personal brand artifact. So this is Casey. She went in, you can tell clearly, on December 5th. Right before finals, Casey went in and gave 2 recommendations. Oddly enough, what happens? The people turn around, and these are Casey's received recommendations. So you see that Lance and Jamie went in, and Casey had not gotten a recommendation since 2012. But the very next day, after Casey wrote one for Jamie, Jamie reciprocated, and then in January, so did Lance. So I have started to assign LinkedIn articles and LinkedIn bio type things, and then recommendations. And I just wanted to give you some feedback from my students. Many say, I found this process to be very stressful. It's a lot of pressure to post something on someone else's profile. But I will absolutely be doing this in the future. It goes a long way to help someone. Amen. Like, good stuff right there. I love that. Now, it's stressful, but the minute you write a recommendation, it goes to the person to approve. It's not like you're out there changing everything. I will continue to write recommendations for folks because I want to show my appreciation I'm actually starting to like this. Another student said, I might write articles again, but it is a hard thing to bring the subject back around to professional themes. It's why we're here. Like, yes, it is hard. That's why I wanted you to do it. I love this. I do not envy full-time bloggers or writers, that's for sure. Oh, now we're in the real process of like how to put something out there with our name on it. Coming up with this article was difficult enough, but the process was enjoyable. LinkedIn is turning out to be a cooler social network than I originally thought, and writing articles gives others a unique perspective on me. One of my very favorites. LinkedIn sometimes really highlights my imposter syndrome, much like the way some of us as grad students experience imposter syndrome just being in grad school. I think that goes all the way through. It doesn't matter what level of school you're in. But I realize I can continue to use LinkedIn in many other ways. Another student says, here I am out of my comfort zone again. But I'm going to continue to do this. And wow, that was intimidating. Pushing that button made my hands sweat. I'm certainly glad that's done. I'm really learning a lot and utilizing LinkedIn. Thank you for the extra push to get my thoughts out into the world. Like, that's the stuff we're here for, right? The other thing to highlight is obviously the licenses, certification, badges, all of the ways as your students start to develop their own list of skills. I really, truly hope you will have them monitor constantly, no matter what level they are. Job postings, set up job alerts, really start to read what companies are looking for and take a self inventory of like, do I possess these skills? Am I building these skills? How am I showing these skills? And sometimes it's doing a quick LinkedIn learning. Other times it's something like your Stumpf social media certification or whatever that you're doing. And you, in the skills section on LinkedIn, your students can actually go in and set those up for their top 3 skills. And then you can all have them endorse one another for those skills, especially after you do a project, a group project. If you complete Mimic Social, whatever that is that you're working on, you can have the students go in and do that. Another great resource is this is a company called skillful.com, and it's mainly for companies, but you go in, I think it asks you to put in your email, but it's, you just put it in and you can bypass and go in, and it just says put in a job title. So for this, I put in marketing coordinator. And then this thing was pages and pages. I could have scrolled forever, but what it does is this is actually a tool to help businesses and HR professionals build a skills-based job description. But what it will do for your students is it will list every competency possible for marketing coordinator, which is far too many. We don't need them all. But as you go through, if they're being students of job descriptions and they're really clear, or as they become clear on where they're headed, what they want to do, or maybe they're not, maybe they need to put in several, maybe they need to do marketing coordinator, social media, PR, and find those skills that are very transferable across several roles. And then what I love to have my students do is start to create their skills inventory for themselves to keep. Like, list the skill, they can get the definition. That was the one thing, if you noticed on the skillful.com site, it gives like a really great definition of each of those skills. Sometimes that's the hard part for these young people, is like, how do I define this? But they can put the definition, and then they can start to put in real life examples of maybe things they've done in your class, things they've done in internships, maybe their part-time summer jobs, anywhere that they have developed or deployed that skill. I think this right here, if we could get on board with helping our students create these inventories, maintaining them, updating, and comparing them to different roles and different things they're doing, I think that first slide where we talked about like the anxiety and the stress and like the pressure of academics, I think it starts to melt away a little bit. I think we're putting our students in the driver's seat and making them take control of the fact that like, I am leveling up, I am learning. They're so used to like learning for the test and their, standardized exams and all of those things, that this is really a new world for them. And I would love for them to understand the first question in every interview, tell me about yourself, right? Then other behavioral exams, tell me about a time this, tell me about a time that. There's something very confident building about having that column C all built out. The other thing, I'm very big fan of Clifton Strengths, and I know a lot of universities use them. Your students have access to them in the career centers. And maybe it's not Clifton. Maybe they need to get on, do High Five or Myers, or whatever it might be. There's access to some out there. The thing that I want you to really draw home here is putting the strength and the definition, and then going back and listing artifacts, examples. How do you live that? Tell me about a time when, right? Thinking through. It's one thing for somebody to say, oh, restorative is my number one strength. But what does that mean? How do you do that? Like, give me an example of it. So like understanding the power that they have over time, getting comfortable with this as a descriptor, adding it to their LinkedIn, doing those things. I think the other thing that is super helpful is when you try and get your students to have one-on-ones with, you know, your alumni or other networking opportunities, things like that. How can we model for them? What does that look like? Sometimes just having a guest. I told a classroom full of high school teachers on Monday, I spoke at a conference about like modeling the preparation of having a Zoom call with a guest speaker, and doing like a parking lot for questions, and like going through the speaker's LinkedIn profile and learning about them and what questions would you ask, and some things about yourself. That's always the hard one. So here's a couple examples of just sheets. One of them, the one on the left for Bernie here, is one that I found. It's just like a one-sheeter kind of thing to help a student kind of understand like their elevator pitch, what they could talk about, things that they've accomplished, their targets, what they want to do in the future, those kinds of things. I went on Canva and made one for myself that was really probably like more representative of where I am at now, not necessarily for a student, but really putting your personality in this and helping your students understand, like, show up as you, because that's enough, right? So being able to go through and list some things that are fun facts, like states I've lived in, things I've done, whatever that looks like, but just giving them some sort of cheat sheet on how to go through and have a conversation with a connection, because that's not always something that comes very easily to them. One thing I did want to highlight, I'm trying this semester, this summer, I'm teaching a project management class. I have about 16 students in the class, and I assigned them to interview a project manager. And then I went through in LinkedIn, and everybody has to give the URL of the LinkedIn of their project manager, a link to the video interview. And then I've put everyone on teams, and they go through 3 rounds, and they're on 3 different teams. They have to watch the other 2 people's interview, and then they do some reflection and some discussion and some comments about, like, how is this project manager doing what we learned about in class? So I'm doing like small group final exam around course content, but with each person having had their own guest speaker, so to speak. Just trying to do something fun and different and collaborative. So when you think about, like, how do we do LinkedIn, good LinkedIn content, thinking about your course topics, asking for help on LinkedIn, looking at current events, finding guest speakers, doing cross-curricular things, bringing in alumni, prompting each of the students to engage and with each other's content. Basically, the power for this for me is the constant reflection. Reflect on how is what we are learning able to be talked about in an interview? How is what we did in this project transferable to a job? Those type, just constant reflection, because that is that critical thinking, creativity that these students don't always have a muscle built for when they come to us. So why LinkedIn? I have my favorite quote is like, don't build your castle on borrowed land. I had a student tell me that they were just going to double down and do everything on TikTok. And I was like, okay, that's great, but not to build a personal like a personal or professional network. Like, it's great for other things, but really truly understanding. I know some professors have students create a portfolio and they have a website. How does that transfer, like, to LinkedIn where it's sustainable and will stay with them? That's the one thing I think is really important. And again, like I mentioned earlier, it really truly is where a lot of communication, engagement, everything is happening right now. I think 74% of people who got a job in the last 6 months say that LinkedIn was directly involved in that. So it's not just for jobs, but those people are sharing their stories and doing a lot of things. It just puts your students kind of in that professional mindset. Now, I mentioned earlier, if you go to this website, it's Stumpf. The last time I presented for the social summit, I created a document. It's a PDF. It's 16 weeks of just 1 or 2 actions a student could do every single week for a semester to get their profile on point. Just 1 week we talked about banner photos and headshots. The next week we talked about, somewhere at some point we talked about doing a recommendation. So that is there for you. It's a free download. Please take advantage of it. And then finally, I would just leave you again with the golden ticket quote. You can get anything if you're a student, in my opinion. Everybody wants to turn around and help those people coming up. We have nothing but compassion for what these young people have been through throughout this pandemic, and we really, truly want to help them. So get your students to use their golden ticket. If I can help, I think I spoke in last fall, I think it was 37 classrooms, and it was like maybe half that in the spring. I don't know if I did warrant a return, but you guys can figure that out for yourselves. I'm happy to guest lecture or pop in. I talk about this stuff all the time. It's my absolute passion. Get a hold of me. There's my email address. But thank you guys for showing up, and thanks always to Stumpf for doing just amazing content like this. So we've got a few minutes left, not very many, for questions and answers or anything I can help with.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Anna. This has been great. There's been a lot of great communication in the chat, and I know I had some people already reach out on LinkedIn and connect with me. So I hope all those connections are happening across the group. We do have a few minutes for questions. We had a few come in. The first one is somebody want to know what class you cover this in, and what level is that class at?
I have done this in social media class. I did it in sports marketing class. I did it in intro to marketing. I do it at the graduate level in marketing strategy, consultative sales, emerging technology, project management, any class where I can assign LinkedIn articles, LinkedIn recommendations, any of those things, because I will tell you the last couple of weeks of every class I teach, I put a spotlight on the personal brand and the ROI of taking the class. Like, how will you leverage up because you took this course? Like, you took it for a reason. I showed up for a reason. How do we merge those? And then how do we lean in on how that's going to be able to be something you leverage in the future? So I could be super naive, but I think that this goes into any course.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're modeling and doing all of those things. And I have a lot of people tell me I don't have the time. Like, I don't want to add this to my course. I think it's like a 5 to 10 minute once a week. You could even just open their minds, get them thinking about it, and get them experiencing it.
Yeah. And it is super beneficial, like I say, for students across the board. Like, if, obviously they're hoping to probably land a job out of college. And so these are skills that they need. And Stumpf, we actually developed a personal branding courseware and simulation. So if you do have a dedicated course, you can use that. Abby will drop a link into the chat to learn more about that. Another question that came through is the activities that you highlighted. Are these activities assessed? And if not, how do you motivate the students to participate in the activities?
I do usually completion, but also with a lot of feedback. And I constantly say to students, like, especially with the articles and things, like, send them to me or send them to each other. Like, let's see what they would look like. And you get some students who'll just write anything and hit submit, move on with their life. You get other people that really need 4 or 5 drafts taken a look at. But usually it's trying to not, like, especially with the articles, it's trying to find work they've already done or something they've already, even presented, if they've presented on something, and giving them the confidence to say, look, you've already done this work. It's representative of who you are. Let's put it in your featured section of your profile. And again, it depends on your teaching style. It depends on your course content. It depends on sometimes the culture at your university. But most instances, I am very much about just giving them the completion and saying, and I've had some people just come to me and be like, look, I'm just not going to I'm not going to do LinkedIn. I'm not going to have a LinkedIn profile. I'm like, okay, great. Like a lot of people have a lot of beliefs about ever showing up. And if you're teaching a marketing class and it's an elective for them, or it's part of the Common Core they have to take, like, I'm not here to like bend their arms. So I'm like, write the article and just upload the Word doc. Like, it's fine. But I try and be, especially in upper level courses, very collaborative and say, okay, like, here's the link to everybody's LinkedIn article. Let's go show them some love, or let's go comment on it. Like, let's support one another. So I try to show up that way as a grader as well.
Awesome. So this next question is kind of on that topic of those maybe don't want to do a LinkedIn. This individual said they had a professional tell them recently that they're finding other professionals in networking over TikTok, which boggled their mind. Any thoughts on that, on non-LinkedIn networking opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, to each his own, right? I think that everything has, this is what I always go back to with my students. Like, I remember when we couldn't imagine anything for like that generation other than Snapchat, right? Or Instagram. Like, it's always like the new thing. But when we go back to professional networking, there has not really been a rival of LinkedIn. Microsoft continues to pour money in it. You can now, like with the LinkedIn Learning and the news, they're doing audio rooms and the video on your profile. Like, they continue to just make these upgrades. That is your professional space. Now, I will say, I follow some thought leaders in HR and different things that I found on TikTok that are far more personal and compelling on TikTok than they are on LinkedIn. Like, I would have a hard time trying to get people to follow like a couple of these people on LinkedIn, but they're fantastic on TikTok. The amount of work and energy and effort and creativity and grind that you have to do, I'm not really sure that the payoff is there. But as we continue to notice the number of generations in the workforce and the issues that we're seeing around the Great Resignation or reshuffling or whatever we're calling it, and now going into a recession, ish, maybe, I don't know, I didn't say that out loud, did I? But whatever is happening with the economy and the workforce and the response to things, I think this is just such a learning space for our students to watch how people are starting to be more holistic and more vulnerable and share more things and support one another and the content that they're sharing. Like, it's just a great learning space, if anything. So yeah, I don't know if I answered that, but
No, yeah, that was great. Thank you.
And if they don't think it's cool or you don't think it's cool, get a hold of somebody that does and bring them in, because I'll change all of your minds. Like, that's how much I love it.
No, this has been great. One more question here before we head off. Just how did you get those great testimonials from your students? That's something that probably a lot of other instructors would like to see, and how to have those type of student reviews.
Well, that's the other thing I do, is I assign a reflection after every activity, after every assignment, every group project, every type of thing. Like, I really was intentional about assigning it after the LinkedIn article and recommendation assignment, because I even just straight up said, tell me how you felt. Would you do it again? Are you a believer now? Like, what was that process like? And they were really great about coming back, as you could see. Unfortunately, they don't do that kind of stuff on course surveys. Student evals are never like that. But I really get them in the process of just reflecting after everything that we do. I think that's so important. So by the time I do this in like 3 or 4 weeks left in class, they know what I'm looking for, and they understand like the real benefit. And there were a couple that people were like, I got nothing out of that and I'll never do it again. And as soon as you grade it, I'm going to pull it down. And that's fine. Like, you can't be everything for everybody.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much, Anna. This has been great. And if you want to connect with Anna and have more questions, or have her speak in your classroom, I know she's more than willing to do that. Her email address is on the screen there. So thank you so much, Anna.
Thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Up next, we have another 4 value pack break.